Hey y'all, welcome to class. This lecture, we're going to review what we've done so far, and we're going to start to build on that knowledge by exploring a couple of different elements in HTML. So before we get started, let's just recap where we're at. So we talked a little bit about an HTML document, what is an HTML document, and the core elements of an HTML document. I'm going to go ahead and just recap that real quick. So documents on the web are shared via HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. When we open up a website in a browser, our browser downloads the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript, and then puts it together for us so that we can visually interact with that website. What we're exploring right now is one component of those three different technologies called HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language. Now, we saw in previous documents and previous lectures that HTML is comprised of three core elements. That is the HTML element, the body element, and the head element. Now, we're going to go through this a little bit today. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview. But first, we have our CodePen environments, and it looks like you all have spun up your CodePen environments. Awesome. And we're going to be using these to perform a lot of hands-on exercises throughout the semester. And today we're gonna start by creating some new CodePen. So you see here, I am on the CodePen website. You guys should all see this. You should all have an account. You can log in, and if you click this little pen button right here, that's gonna take you right here where we have these three panes, and we have this kind of white area right here. Now this white area is where all of our work is going to be rendered, and then these three panes are used for the different technologies that we're going to learn. So for now, we really just need the HTML. So what you could do is you could drag these two over, just like this, and now we have this big HTML pane. Now, HTML is a markup language. It is not a programming language. So it's something that we use to basically provide structure for content. So you can think of this like studs in the wall or the structure of really a building. I always go back to that for some reason, the idea of structure in a building, where the HTML is really the studs, it's the foundation, it's really what we need to have in place to build further interactivity into our web application. So with that being said, we do need some basic structure in place that's always in any HTML document. And that is the first element, which is HTML. Now, actually, before I do this, let me back up for a second. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So let me make sure you can actually see this. And let's go ahead, and I think that's probably a little better, right? Yeah. Okay. So let me go ahead and start to write an HTML document. Now I'm going to do this in an incorrect way first. And then I'm going to build on it to show you what the syntax looks like. I feel like a lot of times when we're going through this, syntax gets in the way. And what I mean by syntax is really how you're supposed to write the actual markup, right? So there is a specific syntax. Like when we studied JavaScript last semester, we were looking at like you needed to put semicolons in places, you needed parentheses in certain places, and all these specific things that you needed to put inside of your code in order for it to actually work. The same thing holds true for HTML. HTML is a little bit more forgiving in that respect because the browser itself will try to fill in any errors that you have. So that could lead to, that helps you but also hurts you because you may have a problem there that it just goes unnoticed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write the three core elements we need for an HTML document. That is HTML, head, and body. Now notice how on the page here, the content was rendered. So we actually have valid HTML coming out here, but it actually isn't HTML yet, right? It's just content. So this is just rendering content, just like we would write in a blog post or an update online or whatever. So this isn't actually HTML yet, but it does talk about, or we wrote down, the core three elements that we need in an HTML document. Now, to make this valid HTML, every single HTML element, which is what we call each one of these, so each one of these is an element, needs to be wrapped in these little alligators. So these brackets, just like this. So each one of these need to be wrapped in a bracket, just like this. So there's an opening and a closing. Oops, not that way. Just like this. Now, notice how our content just went away. There's nothing there anymore. Because now we're saying, hey, this is HTML. But we're still missing a couple of things here to make this syntactically correct. Every HTML element has an opening tag and a closing tag. So what we just did here is we just created opening tags for 3 of the core elements. Now we need to add the closing tags. So to do that, what we could do is we could just do the same exact thing. So opening bracket, but one big difference. We're going to do a / and then the name of the element again, and then closing bracket. So this is how you close an HTML element. So every single HTML element has a closing and an opening. We'll do the same thing for our head. And we'll do the same thing for our body. Now we have our 3 core elements with opening and closing tags. Awesome. We're getting someplace. How about pause the video right here and try to get this into your environments. Now, there is a problem here though. HTML is what we call hierarchical. There is a hierarchy to the elements that we place within a document. Now, think about this for a second. Is there any hierarchy here? And when I say hierarchy, I really mean a parent-child relationship. So something has a parent, and that parent can have children. Those children could also have children. So think of it as like a family environment, right? We have parents, and those parents have children. And eventually, those children will have children. So there's a hierarchy. You could also think of it as like a, back in the day when there was kings and there was like a class system. There was a hierarchy in the societies. HTML, although not political at all, is a hierarchical in nature. So how do we make this a hierarchy? So the parent of them all is the HTML document. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the closing element. I'm going to go ahead and cut it. So I'm just going to say Control X to cut it. And then I'm going to paste it after everything. So now what I did was I wrapped the head and the body with this HTML element. And now by doing just that, the head and the body are now children of the HTML element itself. Now to really kind of drive that idea home, what I'm going to do is I'm going to indent the head and the body just like this. And there we go. Now we can see that the head and the body are inside of the HTML element. And the head and the body, would these be considered a parent-child relationship, just the head and the body, or would it be something else? Think about it. If you have a brother and sister at home, what would we call them? We wouldn't say they're your children or your parents. We would say they're your siblings. So the head and the body are siblings to each other. They're sitting right next to each other. But both of these, the head and the body, have the same parent, which is HTML. Now, these are the core elements in an HTML document. Why don't you go ahead and try to get those into your CodePen environments. Now, one thing I want to do here too is I'm going to name this CodePen environment by just clicking this little pencil right there. And I'm going to say first website. Awesome. Now, you may have noticed something. We wrote this HTML, but do we see anything down here? Not very exciting yet, huh? There's really nothing going on. We don't have any content yet. So, the head and the body are 2 very important sections of any HTML document. The head is really responsible for information that describes the document, not necessarily visual content that the user will see. So for example, in the head, we could put children, such as a title tag. We could say title. Remember, it follows the same exact syntax. So we open and we would close. Now inside of this element, we can put content. So we could say my first website. Now we're still not going to see this, but in an environment where we're rendering this page, this title would actually show up in the tab up here. Now we're not seeing that because CodePen is not going to render that for us, but traditionally speaking, you would put a title on a page. This is somewhat important for search engine optimization. Remember, there's always typically two users of our site. The first is the actual people that use our site. That is the most important aspect of whatever we create for the web. We want to be able to be user-centric so we can, focus our content on our users. But search engines also crawl the web and ingest the content on our website so that they can index it for users of their service that search for content. So that's what we mean by SEO, or search engine optimization, by providing titles that contain keywords that we want people to use to find us. It puts us higher in the list to be found. So these are all important aspects of web development. So, but still, notice we have not seen anything show up here on the page yet. We still have this super boring, nothing is happening website. Where do you think we put the content that is going to be seen by the user? You may have guessed it, it's in the body. So we're going to go here in the body and we're going to put some content. We're going to say, hello world. And now watch what's going to happen. Boom, we have some content. Excellent. So this right here is really kind of the boilerplate, I would say, for a given website. This would be the basic file that you would create to create a website. Now, one important note here, you don't really need any special software to write this, right? We don't need like Photoshop or 3D Studio Max. You literally need Notepad, which comes with any computer you get. So you can write HTML using any piece of software. Right now we're using this kind of web-based editor so we can see the rendering in real time. But you can write this in Notepad. There are some technicalities to hosting a website. We're not going to go into that just yet, but anybody that's interested in that, you can definitely ask me and I'd be happy to help you. Now, what I'd like to do is build on this a bit. We want to now start to look at different elements that we typically use when we're creating a basic website. So the first one is the paragraph tag. So as you can see here, I wrote a quick hello world piece of text, and there's really no tag that wraps it other than the body. Now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this in another tag called the paragraph tag, which, just like the same syntax, we're going to open up our bracket and we're going to type the name of the element, which here it's just called P. And we're going to close this. Now we're going to wrap the hello world in this paragraph, just like this. Now notice the content doesn't change at all, right? So we don't see any difference here, but this is now tagged that this is a paragraph. So what we could do is we could write some content in this. This is my first website using HTML directly. This is an example of a paragraph element on my page. Now, we don't actually see any difference here. It's just like we're writing text in any editor. But what I want to do is let's go ahead and copy this and then let's paste this right underneath it and watch what's going to happen. Not very exciting just yet, but there are some notable things that happened here by tagging this content as a paragraph. The biggest being that we have spacing automatically between these two paragraphs. So if we made this a little bit longer, I'm just going to go ahead and just duplicate this content here. Whoops, I hit Control S. You'll notice how the text is wrapping here as we would normally see in a paragraph, but then when we went to the new paragraph, there was automatic spacing here. So this is really providing some default styling, which we'll explore a little bit later on this semester, that the browser just does for us. So the browser actually injects some default styling because of the fact that we used a paragraph element here. So by using the correct elements within our documents, we're able to structure our documents in pretty logical ways. Now the paragraph is a very popular element that we use in a lot of different areas. What I'd like you to do is write in your document, write 2 paragraphs, maybe briefly describing yourself and maybe some kind of aspirations for the future, what you'd like to do professionally in the future. 2 paragraphs. So I'd pause the video right here and write those out. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce 2 additional elements. Really, I guess 5 additional elements, but if you learn one of them, you'll know them all. So this is the heading elements. Now the heading elements are used to provide headers. Now there's a couple of really important aspects to the heading elements. We'll dive into the first one, which is really easy to remember because it's just heading 1. So heading 1 is the H1 element. And typically the H1 element is something that we would put into the document that really kind of draws our attention to. So we would call it like the main call to action text or the hero text. And typically you only want the H1 element on the page once. This is actually pretty important, and I'll tell you why. The H1 element is used by screen readers in accessibility. So folks that say can't see but use a screen reader will actually get the text read to them. And what the screen reader will do is it will parse the structure of a web document using the HTML and then look for the H1 element. When it finds the H1 element, it will read that first. So typically we only want one H1 element, which really kind of calls out the main objective of the site or the page. And then we would use higher heading elements for other heading sections. So let me show you what this looks like. So H1, again, same syntax. We're going to open up the bracket, H1, close bracket, and I'm going to put hello world in here. And then we're going to close our H1, same exact way we did with all the other elements. And I'm going to take hello world out of this text. And now look what happened. So now we have a big piece of text here that says hello world, and then we have our 2 paragraphs. Notice how visually it's now very, very pronounced. We have a bold text, it's larger fonts, we have spacing all around it. This is all default styling that the browser puts in for us. We're going to be able to override this later on when we start to look at CSS. But for now, we're focused on just the default styling and using the right elements at the right time. So here, the H1 is at the top of the page. It's called out, and now we have our paragraph content. Now, there are many levels of these heading elements. Heading 1 is the largest one. But say, for example, we wanted to put maybe a header on this second paragraph. So let's go down after this paragraph. I'm going to hit enter here, and we're going to say let's put an H2 in. So H2, and I'm going to say second paragraph, if I can spell paragraph, below. And then I'm going to close the H2. Now, notice how the same exact thing happens. So we have this H2 with the second paragraph below. We have the larger text. We have the spacing around it. It is slightly smaller text, but not by much. So this is where we can kind of experiment with the different levels of heading. Now, H2 and beyond, we can have multiple of them on the page. The H1, we want to try to only have one. So if we go to, let's make it like an H3, and let's see what happens. Notice how the H3 got a little bit smaller, and we still have some spacing around it. So you can experiment with this, and you can go up. So H4, H5, H6, they'll all give you the same type of effect, but they'll start to decrease in font size. I'm going to keep it at H3. Awesome. Now, using the heading tags is not the only way to kind of bold and call out content on the page. The headings are usually used in this context where we literally are using them as headings to, say, a paragraph. But say, for example, we wanted to call out maybe this text right here, HTML directly, right? We wanted to bold this text. How would we do that? Now, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. But really, one way I do want to show you is using the strong element. So if we go ahead and say we wrap this text in this strong, watch what's going to happen to HTML directly. Look at that. It bolded for us. So now we have HTML directly bolded right within the paragraph itself. Now this is going to lead us to another lecture down the road a little bit where we talk about block elements and inline elements. We're not going to go too much into this yet, but we just used it. So just to give you a little preview of some new content down the road, we just used an inline element, and the H3s and the H1s and the paragraphs, those are all block elements. So awesome, we could do that. Now, what if we wanted to also maybe italicize this example? What we could do is we could use another element called EM. And close that. And now, look at that. Example is italicized. So we're providing some, not only context to the structure of our page by literally saying, hey, this text is strong and this text is italicized, but we're also providing some styling to the user as they see the content. So these are some popular elements that we would use in HTML. Now, let me pause right here. Why don't you go in there in your document and go ahead and experiment with some of these. Make some bold content, make some italicized content, and see what you come up with. Okay, now the last element that I want to cover in this lecture is the list element. Now, this one is interesting because it requires a hierarchy within itself to really work. And there's a lot of elements that kind of do this. Table it comes to mind as well. But the list element kind of comes in two different flavors. There's an unordered list and there's an ordered list. Super simple. It's basically literally just a bullet pointed list or a numbered list. Think about like step 1, step 2, step 3, or just bullets. So what does this look like? At the end of this paragraph, I'm going to go ahead and start to create a list. So now to create an unordered list, we would use what's called the UL element or unordered list. And again, just like every single element in HTML, we always open and we always close. Now, the UL element itself is not going to do anything for us. We need certain children within it for it to actually work. So what do we need? We need unordered list elements. So we're going to say li for list element, and then we're going to say item number 1, and then we're going to close that li. And then let's put another one in there. We'll say item number 2, and we'll close that li. Now, if we scroll down here, look what's happening here. So now we have an unordered list, and there is already default styling for us. So it's putting some padding around it, it's spacing it out, it's indenting this for us just by providing the right structure in our HTML. But now, what if we wanted to put numbers here and say this is item number 1, this is item number 2? Super simple. Instead of using the UL for unordered list, we would type OL for ordered list. And now look what's going to happen. Now we have a 1 and we have a 2. Boom. We typically use this element kind of pair for creating menus. So we usually use an unordered list, and then we would style it the way we wanted. We would take the bullets out. We would maybe make it arrange a little bit more. We're going to get into that a little bit later on in the semester, but this is all just basic structure of an HTML document. We really need to drive this home before we start to style this content, because this is literally the structure. If we don't have the structure right, it's going to be very hard for us to paint the picture, right? So what I'd like you to do is follow along with me on this. The areas of this video where I asked you to pause and write it yourself, please do that. The assignment for this week is to submit a web document just like the one we went through today in this lecture. And I'd like to see you experiment with heading elements, paragraph elements, and some of these inline elements too, using strong and EM. Also like to see some type of unordered list, maybe a recipe that you like, maybe put it into an unordered list, or a step-by-step kind of tutorial on how to do a certain basic task. You could put that in an ordered list, but experiment. Try to get some muscle memory in here for writing out some of these elements, just to get used to that opening and closing kind of workflow. And yeah, if you have any questions, please reach out. We're going to continue to build on this in the next lecture. We're going to go into a little bit more complicated elements. We're going to look at attributes and how we actually can use attributes to link documents together, and images. So have fun. Any questions? Let me know. Thanks.